A waterman is a man that makes his living on the water. He feeds his family from off the water, from on the water and within the water. He feeds himself.
Watermen are essential to this area, whether that be a captain, someone who fishes these waters, crabbers.
This harbor, St. Michael's Harbor, was full of them once. And they would go out just a mile, maybe 2 miles, maybe 5, and return home with their canoes full of oysters, ready to be shucked or shipped off.
Some work on schooners, some work on skipjacks.
They harvest the oysters, harvest the crabs, they harvest the fish. You like a farmer on the water. They farm in the bay.
The waterman culture is very important and integral to our identity and our sense of self here in the Chesapeake. But I do think that when we think about the sort of the idea of the maritime world as a whole, it really breaks out of that waterman footprint. And I wanted to invite some panelists here to explore and share their experiences about what the maritime world looks like and what it might look like in the future. Will it be one where we see those traditional white workboats, or will it be one where we're really looking at a diversifying workforce and a diversifying environment full of different types of jobs and different new cultures that can help shape our Chesapeake identity? So I'd like to introduce our panelists tonight. I'm happy to introduce Imani Black, who is a friend and colleague, and also the founder and CEO of Minorities and Aquaculture. I'm also happy to introduce and welcome Vince Leggett, who is an author, historian, and the founder and president of Blacks of the Chesapeake. We are waiting on a panelist who may join us, hopefully, Marcus Asante, who's the founder of the Universal Sailing Club. Focused on inviting African-American sailors to the Chesapeake and bringing them together. So thank you all very much for joining us today. We're going to kick off the conversation. The first thing I'd like to ask, and I'll start with Vince, is can you talk us a little bit about your work on the Bay specifically, and kind of when we think about the Black legacy in the Bay, talk to me a little bit about your experience.
So what I would say, for the 30 years I've been working on the short, shallow end and the deep end of the Bay, and particularly coming off of that initial clip where it talked about watermen, I've come to conclude that what people call themselves is more self-identification. I know if I go into Crisfield or Deal Island or Shadyside or Annapolis or Kent Narrows, and if I say, well, all of the blackjacks raise your hand, I don't know how many hands are going up. If I say, well, all the captains raise their hand, well, all the crabbers raise their hand. And so what I've found is that a lot of the titles that we use are really self-identification. And I've just kind of learned that over the years, just working with the men and women, and particularly when it comes to African Americans, Negroes, colored, and just their whole historical relationship on the Bay. When you were out there with a man with no last name and just did not have all of the honor and dignity that came with the storied Chesapeake Bay watermen. When I started 30 years ago and go to a college or public library and pick up a book on the Chesapeake Bay and start flipping through it, very seldom I saw people that looked like me, African Americans. And if they were, the caption would say crab picker or oyster shucker. It didn't say captain, waterman, boatman, blackjack, or nothing. So I would just say that as my opening statement, that a lot of it is self-identification and looking at it from a historical perspective.
Thanks, Vince. That's really fascinating. Imani, I'd love to hear from you too. When how you got to where you are and founding Minorities in Aquaculture, and your own experience working on the Bay. And also sort of when you think of Black legacy and the Black contributions to the maritime world of the Chesapeake, how do you feel you've been shaped by that?
Yeah, I think definitely I've been, a lot of the things that I'm doing now, learning about the legacy of Black watermen has been a catalyst for a lot of those things. I think, as a commercial oyster farmer for, the first 6 years of my career, kind of like what Vince was saying, like I didn't see anyone that really looked like me that was in a manager role or an ownership role or anything like that. And particularly like in 2020, that's when I really started to get really interested in diving deeper into the Black maritime history on the Chesapeake Bay, and just realizing like, wow, like there's a lot of things and individuals and, you know, events that are out there that are not really written about, that are, you know, were really influential in the overall history of the Chesapeake Bay, not just for African Americans, but for the industry in its totality. And none of it is written about. And I think that that was something that really sort of drove me into wanting to amplify, you know, all the things that we do in minorities in aquaculture, wanting to amplify my industry of aquaculture, just because I really see aquaculture as kind of this new wave of traditional fisheries, and really kind of a different approach, obviously, to it. And so I think in a lot of ways, I get to honor what my forefathers got to do, but I get to do it in a different way, in a more sort of modern way of fisheries right now. So I think overall, it has a huge influence, has a huge impact in sort of all the things that I'm doing now. I think it's that connection point for me when it comes to kind of drawing back to purpose, drawing back to understanding, drawing back to the interconnectedness of ecological and social and cultural. So that's what I'm looking at in my thesis right now. So I think all of it's really kind of centered around that.
I know that Imani, that you're descended from Watermen. I'd be interested to hear, Vince, too. You know, how do you feel that this culture is kind of in your blood?
Well, I'll just jump in. I came more from the recreational side of the Bay. My dad and my uncles migrated from North Carolina. They were fishermen and hunters, and they migrated to Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. But fishing and hunting was a part of their culture. They established the Leggett's Sportsman's Club. And even as I got more into history and culture, and particularly in the South, and what I would say is even the Chesapeake Bay and Maryland is either down north or up south. And so, again, it was on the Mason-Dixon line. They wore the blue and the gray in our great state and on our noble Chesapeake Bay. And so even historically in the North Carolinas, the Mississippis, the Alabamas, who could own guns, who had access to firearms, and just all of the codes and black codes around something like hunting and fishing and enslavement. And so for many African Americans, wilderness experiences weren't welcomed. We've all had stories about wilderness experiences, and they all didn't turn out well. And so a lot of it, when it comes to hunting and fishing, is what our lived experiences is on the water's edge and in wilderness spaces. So we brought that with us into the recreational side. But in Baltimore, my uncles were at Bethlehem Steel at Sparrows Point. As kids, we didn't realize that was a shipbuilding company. Bethlehem Steel at Sparrows Point. All we knew is Uncle Wilson worked in blast furnace number 19, and he was a crane operator, or he worked in the tin mill or the wire mill. But that was maritime business. They worked at McCormick Spice. They worked at Domino Sugar as longshoremen and stevedores. And there was a colored section of the International Longshoremen, Labor Union 333. And so even with story groups like the International Longshoremen of America, there was a black section and a colored section and a white section. So again, we come to it from that perspective. We did not fish or crab or oyster or clam for commercial purposes. We were doing it for recreation, but equally important, we were fishing and hunting for the pot, not for the sport. We had to bring something home to eat.
That's an experience I can relate to, at least in my household. Imani, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me it's a little bit different. I mean, growing up on the Eastern Shore, in a coastal community, a lot of my activities and interests were surrounded by the water. In my family, I was sort of, really the first one of my generation, I think, or immediate generations to really be like, I want to be a marine biologist. Like, I'm really drawn to the water. And for a while, just because I have really highly intelligent women and, people in my family doing other things, they were a little confused on like where it was coming from. But then, my mom did our genealogy, which, came up with the Black watermen that are in, our timeline and in our legacy. And so I think just realizing that early on, I was like, wow, like, okay, so this makes sense. This is where this is coming from. I think now it's really, again, it's that connection point of like, the reason why I have so much conviction about this topic is because I have watermen in my family, and, really I feel like for them not to be, recognized or written about or anything like that, other than, on my website right now with like their names and stuff like that, I don't really know their contributions that they had in the industry. And so I think that, yeah, it's really something that I've really just dove into because I want to know more. And I feel like we, as just a community of Black watermen and African Americans and all the things that we've been through in our history, we deserve to be, not a center point, but a big contender of the story of the Chesapeake Bay. And not just, sometimes, but all the time, and not just part of it, but all of it. So I think that's really something that, I just, really connect with my family history, and just also the things I'm doing now.
Well, this is, I think, a perfect segue. We have a next clip that's gonna. So I appreciate hearing from both of you about kind of how you got where you are. And Vince, I love hearing about your family in Baltimore, and kind of and I think you illustrate very well this, that when we think about the Chesapeake Bay and we think about work on the bay, often we think about kind of a stereotype of the work boat. But I think there are really, and always have been, a lot of different ways to work around the water. And your experience and now kind of what Imani's doing really illustrate that. So I like to we'll move into the next part of the talk, which would be really kind of focused on the present. So if we can have the next clip.
So often people are longing for the good old days, however they want to describe them. I would say what has been is gone, and what's going to be is coming up. And what I found to be successful on the Bay is people that are always innovating. People like Captain Eldridge Meredith.
So I think Vince, you're so wonderful on camera. I think that particular part is interesting because, when we think about innovation and transformation and the ways the work on the water and the definition of it is starting to shift, and what that means for, Black access and, the types of jobs that people are getting into and the work that they're doing, and also the world that they're encountering, we're really looking at something that's changing day by day. But I'd be really interested to hear, when we think about kind of, both your work, Vince, and your work, Imani, what challenges have you confronted that you feel are unique to you being a person of color? And we'll start with Vince and then we'll move to Imani, but I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
Well, one of the things, I carry the title Admiral of the Chesapeake Bay, and that is the highest honor that a Maryland governor can bestow on any person in the conservation movement. And you didn't have to be related to the water to get that recognition. Hall of Famer Brooks Robinson, third base, Baltimore Orioles, love rock fishing, sport fishing on the bay. Dr. Burkhart, when we had the Fisteria scare, professors out of the University of North Carolina came in with some innovative research to help us better understand Fisteria. Gary Jobson, ESPN sailing commentator, America's Cup, ... are all admirals of the Chesapeake Bay. But there have been 5 admirals of the Chesapeake Bay, and 3 of those admirals were petitions that I advanced through the Blacks of the Chesapeake, including Captain Eldridge Meredith in 2017 or something close to that date. And I think the point I was making is, as I was writing up, because all of these nominations are vetted, and they go before the Secretary of DNR and the governor's people look them over, because it's a very prestigious honor. No one wants to get embarrassed up on the stage where someone kind of got through the system and something crazy came out. So anyway, but as I was interviewing Captain Meredith and just heard how, as the bounty of the bay was decreasing and the regulation of the bay was increasing, it collided on a way of life. And people like Captain Meredith that can zig and zag, can make changes, make adjustments, because they went from commercial crabbers and oystermen and watermen, and then started carrying fishing parties out on the bay, started carrying scientists out on the bay, started running down runaway crab pots that was tying up the Money Boys' propellers when they were out there doing fishing on the bay, high-end money sport, but crab pots get wrapped around a propeller when they have, $10,000 worth of customers on their boat, and a crab pot has them sitting in the middle of the bay with nothing happening. So the point I'm making is Meredith was able to innovate, but many of his peers were not. And maybe in another segment, we can drill down on why some people can innovate. It's risk, it's capital, it's forward thinking. But for right now, I'll just put a pin in it and let Imani get into the game. But I like to drill a little deeper if that's where you want to go a little later.
I love all that. So I think that's something that is super interesting, especially when you look at other areas, geographical areas of Black watermen, like on the East Coast, especially like the Gullah Geechee community, things like that. Just in different research, it's just been documented that there wasn't a lot of diversification in occupation. And so I think that that's a very unique trend on the Chesapeake Bay that we've seen, or at least that I've seen in my research. So that's a really great point. I think the, overall like misconceptions that and challenges that I've faced as a person of color, again, have just come from my career as a commercial oyster farmer. Majority of the time, it only mattered that I was a female, but the times that it did matter when I was a person of color more, I think, was really stemming from this historic misconception that, Black people don't have any connection to the water or have any business being on the water, which is something, again, we see historically of, just a lot of the different challenges that Black watermen faced before now, and some of the things that they're facing now, because those, changes or those challenges have not changed, even though the time period has changed and societally we've changed. And socially we've changed. There's still obstacles, and there's still, kind of negative engagement that is happening with Black watermen, that in the interviews that I've done with the Black watermen, that they've, have really been up front and just honest about their experiences. So for me, I think that, I feel like it's just something that I'm always going to be combating, which is like, again, another catalyst for my thesis, because it's a wildly wrong misconception that African Americans don't have any connection to the water. We might not see it as much right now, but we were really the backbone for what Chesapeake Bay commercial fishery is. And I think that it just demonstrates the lack of documentation and the lack of recognition of our contributions and things like that historically that haven't been there that has kind of cultivated these misconceptions. So I think, overall, it's not anything new, even in this new wave of the fisheries that I'm in. But it's something that, definitely I feel like stems from just the lack of knowledge and the lack of awareness and education of the significance of Black watermen and African Americans in the Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you both. I'm interested. We've talked about the working side. Vince, you have experience on the recreational side of the Chesapeake. So, people are both working and playing in the Chesapeake Bay. And historically, I think, and I know, Vince, you've been very involved in sort of the preservation of Carr's Beach and the legacy that's happening there. And I think about the recreational legacy of Blacks in the Chesapeake is just as strong, and if not, a wonderful story of celebration and perseverance. But I'm wondering too, when we think about overcoming misconceptions, do you feel that misconception extends to the recreational side as well? That that people of color, are maybe not as welcome or don't have the same access to beaches, to sailing, to boating, to things like that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Right, and I would just like to pick up where Imani left off at, because even I've seen the trend to aquaculture, and Imani is closer to it than me. But when I talk to the brothers and sisters on the bay, just looking at the cost of getting into aquaculture, a lot of the people I see are in both worlds. They're doing wild harvest, they're doing traditional harvest, they're 1 foot over in aquaculture. And so the whole permitting and leasing and water columns and just all of the barriers for some people at the end of the day is capital and access to capital and risk-taking. They're business people. So at some point, even as we talk about innovation, I see the trend going toward the aquaculture. And the money boys got $10 on every horse running, because nobody knows who's going to win, but you have to have resources to play that game. $10 on every horse in the race. So at some point, let's circle back to Imani, but getting back to the question that you raise is, what I say is that whether it is the guy with a skiff and a set of hand tongs trying to make it on the bay, to a bay pilot. And when I talk about bay pilots, that whenever a commercial vessel with a foreign flag comes on the Chesapeake Bay, whether it's through Cape Charles or Cape Henry in Virginia, through the Capes, Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia, Hampton Roads, your viewing and listening audience may be familiar with some of those areas, but that's where the Atlantic comes onto the Chesapeake, all the way 200 miles due north to the C&D Canal and down the Susquehanna River. A Maryland pilot, not airplane, boat pilot, has to go to that ship, and they wear tweed jackets with suede on the elbows. They smoke a pipe, and they make $300,000 a year. And so just look at the technology. I mean, I go up to the Marine Institute and the Merchant Marine Academy and Coast Guard Academy. I go to those institutes and training facilities and see who's sitting in the desk and what are barriers to participation, because that's the high end of the industry. But African Americans are doing that work. I mean, we have a young African American here in Annapolis. There's a bay pilot. He has the tweed jacket. He's smoking a pipe now. I won't say what his salary is, but so I'll point to that gentleman. And we had another African American before him that was handling for Exxon major oil tankers through Panama Canal, Suez Canal. And so when we talk about careers and diversity, I'm going to point to the high end as well. Let's be a bay pilot. And we talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. Those are all higher order thinking. And so point young people to careers like that. So I'll just kind of use that just as an example to show you both ends of the football field. It's a guy with a little skiff and a set of hand tongs. Let's put him on one goalpost. and let's put one of these bay pilots that have all of this training and handling these major tankers that we see sitting out in the 50-foot channel of the Chesapeake Bay, waiting for instructions to come into Baltimore, to the General Motors plant, to the Toyota plant, to Domino Sugar. They're waiting for their turn at the dock, and then another pilot, a docking pilot, will take over the boat when they get into Baltimore's harbor. So we're talking about careers.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely echo and just to piggyback with where Vince was going with occupations, I think he's absolutely right when it comes to, again, that diversification of occupations. As we see the trends and ecological fluctuations happening in the Chesapeake Bay, and socially where African Americans are in the Chesapeake Bay, we have to have a different approach with how we are engaging with the next generation coming into these maritime occupations. And so, that's again where like the connectiveness comes in of like, how can you connect someone that's never to industry that's never had an experience with it? And so you have to start there with the experience and then grow the interest based off of what their interests are, what their skill sets are, and intertwine them with what's happening on the in the industry and what could happen and what innovations could change, the industry as it is right now. So I think, yeah, definitely occupation is something that is really important when it comes to the future of African Americans, which I know we're going to get to the future part, but that's a really strong testament. So I just wanted to piggyback off of that.
I think you're painting a picture for everybody who's participating tonight of kind of, the broadening scope of what this Chesapeake world looks like. Stepping away from just the definition of work on the water as being one thing to work on the water being many things, and how we're seeing, people of color, Black African Americans moving into those roles, as Vince pointed out so beautifully, but as you're experiencing too, Imani, with the women in MIA who are looking to begin and not really sure how to get started. So, I think it shows that this is really kind of an exciting time for the Chesapeake world, and also a time that kind of redefines what it means to work on the water in general. So, as we start looking towards the future, I want to start thinking about, or have our panel start thinking about, kind of transformation, access, and as Vince pointed out, you know exactly where we're going, Vince. When we think about innovation. So if we could have the next clip.
We definitely should document as much as we can about the past. That's a really comforting piece to people that are starting their relationship with the waterways, especially Black people. For me, this isn't an area where it's new that we're coming into. We're just bringing you back home.
When we have a sense of who we are in the past, that kind of helps to affirm who we are in the present and as we go forward as well.
Just to understand the heritage of how this Black community lived together, worked together, and communed together, it's empowering to me because sometimes you don't see that now.
That's a story of resiliency. That's a story that people weren't settling, that people wanted more for their life, and they built schools and homes and became leaders in their communities.
So as we look ahead, the two of you both serve as mentors and leaders to the next generation of people of color who are coming into the maritime world. I'd like to hear what you think they're going to experience. What does the next generation look like? What do they want to do? What are they interested in? What types of jobs, what types of work is going to be available to them?
Well, I'll give it a shot. I worked at the Department of Natural Resources for 10 years. And my academic training is a bachelor's degree in urban planning and community development from Morgan State University. And I have a master's degree in public administration from Central Michigan University. I would have never knocked on the door at Maryland Department of Natural Resources and said, "Are you hiring?" Because the image right on Royal Boulevard and Taylor Avenue near the Marine Corps Navy Stadium, big pretty building on the corner, lit up like a Christmas tree at night. Fabulous looking building. But I didn't know anybody that worked in that building. I didn't know anybody that worked there. I hadn't heard the stories of anybody that worked there. And my idea was it's a bunch of scientists and nerds on the other side of that wall, so don't even ring the doorbell. I got there and found out they had 260 job classifications behind that brick wall. Writers, computer Greeks, mathematicians, statisticians, map makers, truck drivers, truck washers. I said, give me a printout of every job you had back here, and carried it downtown to the Legislative Black Caucus. And what the research showed was that there was a 1 or 2% African-American, Black and brown working in that type of agency. And I'm talking about in 1990 to 2000 is around the time frames I was over there, you know. But I guess the point is that until you see one, it's hard to be one. And I'm not even going to go over to the Department of Agriculture or over to the Department of Environment or over to Maryland Environmental Service, but it gave me insight to careers. And so when I do career advising, I'm not trying to make anybody anything. I'm not trying to turn out basketball players, football players, medical doctors. What I say is whatever your passion is, you can apply your passion to the Bay and the environment. So if you want to be a world-class photographer, take pictures of the Bay. If you want to be a statistician or a journalist or a writer, I'm just saying, whatever your passion project is, go for it. But this is a world where you can achieve that, where you can get paid for your passion. I mean, I was a college counselor for another 10 years at Anne Arundel Community College. I've had to reinvent myself about 8 times. Because when I talk about people that can zig and zag, and you know, you always have to be retooling to stay relevant. And so I guess the big point is that when we're looking at future generations, just exposure. I'm a product of exposure. That's where my differential in life have came at, either through my parents or neighborhoods or people saw some potential. Even in kindergarten, the lady told my mother, little Vinny has potential. That means he's not doing well when you're in the kindergarten. And when they have parent night and say, little Jimmy has a lot of potential, it means he's having issues. But a little focus, let's shake them up a little bit. And so that's what I try to do through my work, through Blacks of the Chesapeake, is just try to open the door, provide people exposure. The light bulb might not go off that day, but some seed might get planted.
I was agreeing with everything that you just said. I was just nodding away. Just took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, no, I'll just echo that. And you know, in Minorities and Aquaculture, we have a program called Minorities on Course that is like doing exactly that, working with the next generation directly and helping them create their own version of the maritime career. A lot of them, luckily, are the next generation of the last existing Black watermen. So their desire to continue on their father's legacy or their grandfather's legacy or their uncle's legacy is really inspiring. And I think like for them, in that program, we are, you know, fully funding people to get their like Coast Guard 100-ton captain's license, to become like licensed boat captains on the Chesapeake Bay, to have credentials, to have certifications, to be able to work on tugboats, to be marine pilots, to kind of get a kickstart in the endless possibilities, like Vince was saying, that are maritime occupations now. So that's something that we really take a lot of pride in, because not only are we interacting with the last living Black captains, but also this next generation that's sort of that saw their fathers, you know, build their businesses and worked on those boats and things like that. And really, you know, it wants more and wants something different, and sees, you know, things like social media and technology and all these other things coming to play, and realizing, oh, wow, I have to make a pivot. I can still honor and cherish what my father and my, forefathers taught me. But now I have to shift in a different way to keep up with what's happening currently in the Chesapeake Bay. And so I think as far as like the next generation, that's some of the, perspectives that have been shared within the program. And I think that there's a lot of excitement really of being kind of having a huge hand in preserving, the Black legacy, being able to be a part of that history, and being able to not let it, kind of slip away with the remaining, 13, 14 that are still around, that are, majority of them are the age of 60, that are still working and that are still active, that are still out there every day and working hard as if they were 20 years old. But eventually they're gonna have to retire. They're gonna want to retire. And so for a lot of the older Black watermen too, and my thesis interviews, they really kind of raised concerns of like, well, I would have retired 5 years ago if I didn't feel like if I left, then it would just be a slow decline of not having any African Americans a part of the Chesapeake Bay. So I think it just gives a lot of hope. The next generation is given a lot of hope. It may not look like the same ways that we've done in the past, but I think that's okay because a lot of this next generation is really trying to bring all of those emphasis into this new wave and this new path and really honoring it and cherishing it in like it's this own kind of way and something that they're really proud of. I think that's the most important thing. They're really proud and just grateful to have an opportunity to be able to continue that legacy. And that's something in the program that we really cherish because, we're just trying to, with the program in particular, it's about preserving the legacy. And that's actively what we're doing. We're not just going to talk with fourth graders and trying to get people out on the boat, which we also do too. But that's like kind of our biggest, thread of that program is really working with them one-on-one, bringing in, some of the very few younger captains that are around as they're doing their captain's license test, as they're going through kind of all of these different things and going through real life at the same time. That support system has been really, instrumental to them. And for a lot of them who've taken the course, 2 or 3 times before and then been a part of the program, they're passing, 60% of their tests on the first try because we've really given them the resources and the support that they've needed that they didn't get in the past to be able to believe in themselves, to be able to do this.
And Imani, and even Stanley. I mean, as you said, she got off a UPS truck or some truck, and look, and she got a towing license and a 100-ton cat.
Yeah. So
about that young lady, she's kind of our poster child. Say something about Stanley.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our first, we've had 2 cohorts so far of minorities on course. In our first cohort, our very first woman happened to be a family friend. And she had never stepped on a boat before or done anything in the maritime occupation. She was a FedEx driver for, the last 10 years. And she came to me and said, I'm done driving for FedEx. I want to change my career. I want to kind of explore this. Is this something that I could do? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And she studied her butt off and went to extra sessions, was out on the boat, did what she had to do to pass her captain's license, straight away, and not just get her captain's license, but got her towing license and her sailing license on top of that. So I think thank you, Vince, for bringing that up because I love to just highlight Stanley because I think she's a great example of what networking and support can really do and what intentional resources can really do. It's not that we're not interested or we don't, as a demographic, we're not interested in being in maritime occupations, is do we have the support and the resources that are needed to be successful? And so I think Stanley's the perfect example of that, of when you have the right tools and the right people that see the vision, even in the kind of the times where, we're doing study questions and she's not understanding because she's has to be, a visual learner and things like that. I think that encouragement was really what got her through. And so, yeah, I'm just so proud of Stanley. She's my shining student, really, even to this day.
Yes.
The 2 of you are really painting a picture of the future of the Chesapeake that's really vibrant. And I can't wait to see what Stanley and the next sort of up and comers in this new generation do with this relationship with the water. And, Vincent, really your comment about you can't be one until you see one. I think, the approach to mentorship, to support, and to helping, these maritime, contributors of the future, in a structured way, shows that there are people that are interested. And this is not a dying way of life. This is very much a living way of life. And it's just changing and transforming in really amazing and remarkable ways. I want to give both of you a chance to just sort of answer the last question before we start taking questions from the audience. And that is, what do you want people to know about the future of the sort of the Chesapeake's Black maritime world? What do you want people to walk away with?
I think you said it, honestly, that it's not going away. We're not, falling off. We're not fading into the darkness. We're coming back with a vengeance. We're coming back with that preservation in all of the different ways, while also honoring, the Black watermen that came before us. So, yeah, I think, definitely that is something that I would love for people to just continue to pass on, that like African Americans, you haven't seen nothing yet when it comes to us in maritime occupations.
And I guess for me, I'm active in African American boating and yacht clubs, and people still don't believe that we have such African American boating and yacht clubs. And they talk about the time where they couldn't go to certain piers, they couldn't get gas. Again, particularly during the period of leisure, recreation, and entertainment, during the period of segregation and state-sponsored segregation, I may add. And so we work with another group called Black in Marine Science. These are PhDs, post-PhDs. They are 30, 40 years old. So I hang with young people now. I'll go by the nursing home and wave at some of my guys, but I hang with the Imani Blacks and the young people to keep me fresh and popping, and I pour into my grandkids and great-grandkids. So that's really what my joy is, opening doors. As James Brown said, open the door and I get it myself. So I'm trying to use my influence to open doors. And when it's all said and done, that's what I want somebody to chisel on my store: Vince Open Doors.
Well, this has been just the best conversation. This is the perfect, you guys know each other so well, but also, you can really each speak to this, a real breadth of, experience on the Bay, working, and now sort of mentoring and supporting others moving forward. So we definitely, this is a very engaged audience, and we have some questions in the chat. The first one, the waterman way of life is dying somewhat due to overfishing and pollution impact on fish, crabs, and oyster populations. Looking to the future for businesses and employment on the water, what are you seeing as potential opportunities for Black watermen or women? Aquaculture, baby. Go ahead, Imani.
Yeah, I think Vince, you touched on it. All the occupations that we, just kind of went over, I think just that's where the potential is, sort of in the non-traditional ways of this, of the waterman way of life, really kind of redefining it in these, other maritime occupations that we haven't been involved in heavily yet. So, Vince, tugboats still, you said like Chesapeake Bay pilots, all the things.
And what I would say is, from the person that put the question in, first, what I would just say is I don't buy into their premise. Let me just start right there, because I think that it's too simplified when you start talking about who overfished. This is what I say. It's the farmer, it's the wastewater treatment plant, it's what's happening upstream with cattle in streams, it's urban dwellers who don't have a seat at the table, that are still changing the oil on the car up on Martin Luther King Boulevard, wherever that may be, or throwing trash down the sewer hole and say, well, Mr. Vincent, at least I didn't throw the Mountain Dew bottle in the street. I threw it in the sewer hole. And I say, well, baby, that's progress, but let me show you where it ends up at. So I think that when we pick out one segment of who influences the Bay and don't acknowledge there are a combination of segments that contribute, I think it makes it more difficult to reach to a consensus. And so that's what I work for. Everybody has had a hand in degrading the quality of the Bay. The farmer, the waterman, the sewer treatment plant, everybody, the urban dwellers. And until we get all of the players around the table, we aren't maximizing our public investment. Recently, I got appointed by the Speaker of the House of the Maryland General Assembly, Adrian Jones, as the citizen representative on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and that was my speech on the opening meeting. Let's get all the players around the table.
Next question. Do you feel that a college education is the best way to get into the industry, or does it benefit a person to get into the business at an early age, working their way up, learning all aspects of the industry as they go?
Vince, you want me to take it?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. I honestly, in my opinion, I think you can do both. I don't think you have to choose either or. I think, you know, for me, and I'm speaking from my experience, I didn't have a very in the box type of trajectory to my career. So I don't really believe in like kind of like doing things the traditional ways or doing one thing or another. I think that whatever, like kind of Vince was saying before, whatever you're passionate about, you will bring in all these different aspects to make, you know, your passion be as amplified as possible. And so I think, you know, having an education, a college education, great. I think that that definitely gives you that information and that knowledge that is definitely needed when it comes to like business planning and different things like that. But there's also, yeah, there's the benefit of getting the hands-on experience too. There's a lot of things that you can't learn from a book that you can learn out on the water. And so I think, you know, the mix, it has to be a really good mix of that, so that you're not sort of abandoning one to do another. But that's just my opinion. So I'll pass it over to you, Vince.
Yeah, and I think that definitely, I mean, I think for African Americans, for sure, education has always been the best way up and out for African Americans. And many of the Black mamas and the Black grandmamas are not encouraging their kids to go out on that water. It's undependable. Between the harvest of the Bay and the regulation, you don't know whether you're going to make payroll or not. And so, again, it goes back to having a diversified portfolio. And so that's learned experience, trade school. I mean, some of my best friends are marine mechanics. And you can't find enough of them out here. I have one that work at one yacht yard, one boat yard, and he can't get to the next boat yard next door because he have enough work in the one he's in. So again, and that doesn't need a college education to be a marine mechanic. I wish that Marcus Asante was here. I mean, he's trained in marine engines and marine mechanics and things of this nature. And you don't need a college education for it, but they making just as much money as plumbers and electricians, and none of them went to college, and probably making as much as a GS-15.
Yeah,
and less
that's
headaches.
what I was getting ready to say too.
Look,
Plumbers,
and less headaches.
Yeah. Trade schools, right? Like I feel like we've just like thrown those by the wayside, and I'm like, I'm on team bringing them back because that is that's a viable career that we've just not tapped into, or that's like been looked down upon for like way too long. And that all of this falls into that, you know, like working with your hands, having those technical skills. There's a lot of value in that I think is a little bit categorized a little bit differently than a college education. Like Vince was saying, like it's not in the same kind of lane, but it's all education, it's all knowledge, and it's all skill. So I think however you feel like you can build your career, whatever you feel like you need, whatever certifications, qualifications, whatever, go out and do them. You know, those are the things that are important to you that you feel like are going to get you to the next step. Then, you know, definitely pursue them and definitely, you know, try to push through them so that you can bring all those things together and do what you want to do.
I'll take one last question because I want to be mindful of everybody's time. There's one more question that I think Any interest in extending minorities in aquaculture or Blacks of the Chesapeake over to Delaware Bay, since they also have a rich history of Black watermen?
We're all over. We're international, so yeah, definitely. It just sort of hasn't happened, like that. But yeah, Delaware has is a part of that rich history. The estuary there, the Black watermen there, the contributions there, all the same things, And I think like it would be great to amplify and like sort of connect with other Black. Don't even know. Vince, are there Black watermen still living in the Delaware Bay?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a great
and
question.
they have an organization of Black Marine officers where they have pilots, river pilots on the bay, and
Yeah.
they have training programs. So yes, they're all over, and I work with those folks. And what I'll also say is that last Friday I was with 11 Black watermen on the Chesapeake Bay. Lamont Wright, Montrell Wright, he's kind of the dean of the watermen, and we were just looking at the whole issue of emerging opportunities. But what I would say also yesterday, I was on a Zoom through PBS looking at climate change and climate gentrification. So again, I hope to have extended conversations about what's just going on the water's edge as well. And we work internationally also.
We have one more question that I just, that I think we should answer. So there's some interest in reaching out to the two of you because all this talk about students and outreach has some of the participants interested in hearing more. How should folks, what's the best way for them to contact you if they're interested in working with you, maybe more closely with their particular group?
Yeah, look, visit our website, miampo.org. My email's on there and more information about our programs and just sort of the engagement and outreach things that we do. There we have, instead of calling people volunteers, we call people champions. So you can sign up to be a champion, be a part of our monthly newsletter that comes out so you can keep up to date on like all the things that we do and where we're going to be and sort of our accomplishments that, come out throughout the month. So head over to our website, become a champion of MIA, donate what you can, look into sort of, really amplifying what we do. That's always, supportive as well. So yeah, definitely just Google minorities in aquaculture. We're the only one that comes up.
Yeah, but I would say that I know they're going to record this session, and in the chat, Blacks of the Chesapeake, Vince Leggett gives you another glimpse into our world and the work and the projects we do. So the guys used to say up in East Baltimore, I ain't hard to find.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, a huge thank you to you, Vince, and to you, Imani, for taking the time to share your experience with us. And I know that everybody in the audience has really enjoyed it. A shout out to MPT for allowing us to use the Water's Edge clips. And thank you so much to the Maryland Center for History and Culture for hosting this discussion and continuing to provide a forum for all of us to learn more about Maryland's history and legacy and how it impacts us today. So thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you everyone for participating.
And thank you. You are a great host and
you.
moderator. Thank you.
I do my best. Thank you, guys.
Panel. Great moderator, Kate.
All the love and all the gratitude in the chat.
Thank you, Miss Chloe.
So much. Yes, thank you all. This was a beautiful way to kick off our spring season. Thank you all so much. Kate said it all. That was incredible.
And Chloe, I follow your work as well. Oh yes, I keep up with you.
Yeah.
Your writing and your amplification. And look, we know who you are, Miss Chloe.
Oh, I'm so honored. I'm just doing what they paid me to do.
I love it. Happy Black History Month, everybody.
Yeah. Shout out to these wonderful people for being our kickoff. Yeah. happens
Yeah,
all
I
the
don't
time.
know about you guys, but I'd much rather celebrate Black History Month than dry January. So
Yeah,
There
dry
you go.
January, so
There
you
you
can
go.
celebrate Black History Month more.
woohoo!
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks
All right.
everybody.
Thanks,
Hope you all
guys. Have a
take
good
care.
Thank
night.
you.
All right,
Yeah.
bye-bye. Thank you.